Welcome back to Weekend Walkabout, where we're in our gardens and yours virtually.
And we're from Garden A to Z. I'm Stephen Nicola, aka Santa Claus.
I'm Janet McConovich. We're talking about Thanks Great Grandfolks, which is history, moving into chapter 2, which is 1920 to today, working off of the outline that is on our website in the audience notes page. So we're up to 1920. And 1920, big news here, huge news, is, you know what? You can take this new stuff that we're using so much of now, soil, and you can spray it on stuff, and it kills bugs, and it does things. So they started using oils as pesticides, and it was groundbreaking because orchards were at this point terribly
decimated,
terribly ridden with pests that had caught up with them from Europe. And we had capitalists taking advantage of things like the USDA saying that you can smother things. So we have the International Paper Company saying, make this your mulch paper year 2. Can you see at the top?
It's
people rolling out big rolls of paper between their rows of vegetables.
And it's laid out.
Here, yep. Pretty cool, huh? What goes around comes around. These are later bulletins from Michigan, which was not even Michigan State yet. It was Michigan College.
Michigan State College.
But we're now getting extension that comes out from Pennsylvania's university, from Ohio's university, from Michigan's university,
Cornell.
So more specific to the region, which is really helping people understand how to do things in their particular part of the country. And we get things like from Cleveland, this company is explaining to people how to grow better gardens in their pamphlets. My mother on her pony there for her picture in New Jersey is not really listening. They still have just a line of privets and a little teeny tiny narrow space at the front of the house. But this Better Gardens is saying, look, you shouldn't be leaving stuff, just make it tidy, make it neat. Put some hedges, put some lawn. Here's what it should look like. This is what people were being shown as the ideal, as the being a good citizen, was to garden those areas, put up those hedges.
Remember, we just went through a war. We're kind of united. It's before the crash of the stock market. Everybody's excited.
We're into the roaring 20s, where those people that survived, my grandmother didn't survive. She died when my dad was just 2, because young people were dying from that 1918 flu pandemic. So now we've got people starting businesses like this Newark nursery is selling shrubs, and I want you to take a look at some of these shrubs on the list here. Butterfly bush, which 40 years later, when I want to get butterfly bush, because Grandma Frances used to have one, I'm told by all the people in Michigan, it doesn't grow here. It's not hardy. And yet here it is explained that it's going to die back, but just cut it down. And calycanthus, our sweet shrub, something that is new right now, a patented plant. Yes. Wow, look at this.
And coralberry and clethra and Cornus elegantissimus, the variegated leaf.
Yeah, lots of the things we see now. And in that catalog, the ideal being presented is, again, a house pushed back, maybe some plants right along the front, but a lawn, maybe a hedge, maybe not.
And a few
and a
trees.
Tree. And a House and Garden magazine, which is another one of these garden club things, is showing people how to do this. We loved this article. This is a 1925 article, might be 1926. I've forgotten which one this magazine was. This article was Count Your Plants. I said, what is this Count Your Plant stuff? What are they talking about? Well, this is the landscaping industry. The American Nurserymen Association is now been formed.
They want to know.
And they're looking at houses in the average range, nothing more than $10,000 in the average range. And they counted and found that your average well-planted home has at least 8 trees. I can't see my number, so I can't remember if it's 8 or 18. 122 shrubs, 16 evergreens, 2 plants of small fruit, 13 rose bushes, 83 perennials. And how do you love that total cost?
$178.95 without tax. There was no sales tax at that time.
Yep. Can you imagine? Can you imagine?
But
this is what was being held up to these people who said, yes, I want to do this.
But if you realize that $200, that's a quarter of the cost of a car.
Yeah, of a DeSoto, not just a car.
Not just a car.
This is from that same magazine. So it's quite a bit. And in that same magazine, there they are. Now we have the feather lights, which anybody can push. Anybody.
Yeah.
Makes Philadelphia green. And we have things like going on where the parks are continuing to be developed. Now we're down in Dayton, where after the incredibly devastating floods in 1913, where the whole population survived by running to the tops of a few hills, they've circled the whole city with levees and made parks out of all of the levee areas to go all the way from Wagerson up there over to, I think it's Indian over here, down through the Arboretum and over to Indian. So parks,
it's a great chain of parks.
And this is employing people in taking care of lawns and trees and flowers and nature. So the industry is beginning to really grow. So that by 1930, things are looking a little bit different. And what do you think? Who have you got on your timeline in the 1930s? In Steve's case, his mom was just born. But my dad was a teenager and getting his first job. What do you think influenced your grand's gardening methods? If you've got any thoughts here, if they're from back in that era.
They didn't garden. We had.
Dad worked a shovel though.
Yeah.
By gosh, they had those work production. No, I can't remember what it's called. The WPA. They had people out working. So go ahead, type something in.
Joe and Mom talk about a garden in their yard.
Yeah. Yep, buckthorn is still being sold, and it's still a scourge. Grands who were golfers, see, so they loved their lawn. In fact, first thing that my parents did when they bought a house was very proudly get a mower, get a lawn, because yes, that
was one of the first things we did when we bought a house, is got a power mower, and then we decided no.
But there were a lot of grands in our case, not our parents, but our grandparents, who were at the time being employed as laborers, being taught to do things they hadn't done before. They were building stone walls along the Blue Ridge Parkway and in Portland and in Oregon and in California. They were building highways. They were learning to do things with their hands and sculpt the whole countryside, which meant landscape architecture really took off at this point.
My mom's dad was a carpenter and my dad's dad worked for Ford, so they both had jobs. They didn't have the time.
They were building things with their hands though. Yep. And that's right, the alleys in the back where the cars came in. Yep. Chickens. My mother knew how to kill a chicken. She also now her family raised rabbits rather than chickens. I'm not sure why people do one thing or the other. Maybe because they came from Russia and wanted the fur as well as the meat. But that's the way that it goes. But in the 1930s, we had in Chicago, centered in Chicago, we have the Prairie School of Architecture saying we can make things look like they fit in the prairie and we can use our native plants. This is Frank Lloyd Wright. Building houses and his apprentices and students, and Jens Jensen doing the landscape architecture. And at this point, this is when the U.S. starts looking different. If I go across the river and look around in Windsor, the gardens look different. The house layouts look different. They stayed more in the European style.
There is a difference. Yeah. Toronto too.
Yeah. And Olmsted, I do apologize. Olmsted does not have an A in it. Frederick Law Olmsted's name is Olmsted. And we got better weather forecasting because, in large part, had been some disasters at the turn of the century. But by the 30s, there was a lot of shipping and a lot of problems on the Great Lakes, and they needed more accurate weather, and that made a difference to people. So Belle Isle there has a park that looks very much like Jackson Park in Windsor. And they were together then in 1900. And then from then on, we started with, if you look around the Ford estates in Detroit and around the Mott estate in Illinois, you're going to find a much different look than what you find in Canada. So in 1939, House and Garden here, great big format magazine, is showing us what we should grow. Flowers, bedding plants, in borders. Bulbs. Now. We're bordering things, lots of bulbs. And in the same magazines, showing us, just as they do today, those things.
The ones to aspire to.
Right. There's no way you're going to be able to afford this 6 or 7 bedroom house with all of these paved walkways and fountains and stuff like that. But we can look at them and we can dream about having a rose garden.
But wouldn't it be nice to have a little rose garden right here?
Yeah. Stephen put this one in. Stephen says,
sex sells.
It just
period.
Yep, the Victorian lady, now the lady in the 30s, they're still pushing, and now they've got power mowers. I love it. There's no better way to turn lawn work into play. And yes, a lot of people hated lawn work, and we're glad to have kids to stand out there. I mowed that lawn with that push mower when I could barely reach the handles.
I ran a Jacobson at my cousin Rick's house every Saturday morning that we spent time there. We had to do the lawn first.
But still people are resisting this. I want you to look at 3 family pictures. This one of Steve's uncle and his grandfather.
My grandfather. Yep.
And here of his grandmother and grandfather. And there of my aunt. And what you see in common there, where they choose to go outside for the good light and get a picture. Look at their feet. Does that look like velvet sward that somebody wants to have there, or does it look like something that once in a while you go and hack down? So
the book said that a good man with a scythe can do an acre of lawn twice a month. Yeah, right. Yeah, they were in a heck of a lot better shape than we could be.
But a lot of lawn seed being developed and being pushed.
Yes.
So your catalogs not only had vegetables, herbs, trees, shrubs, and flowers, but it also had various lawn grasses.
Types of grass for different.
Which sets us up to 1940. So here's all these people being moved into houses that have a place for a lawn, not that they really want to take care of a lawn. And in 1940,
they didn't have the time
1940,
either.
The good citizens are being told, because they're doing it in Europe and they've dug up Great Dixter and they've dug up Sissinghurst and made them into vegetable gardens. You should do this in your yard too. Make a victory garden. And that's what happened. We got a lot of gardening converts in the 40s. It's our parents who became the first ones to really hand down a lot of information, especially since, based on the technology from the First World War, refined in the Second World War, suddenly everybody's got the DDT, organophosphate type pesticides, and are using them at great rate. They're miracle products.
Great rate. They're advertised as miracle products.
So are the chemical fertilizers.
Sold.
Not manure anymore, but now they've got a way to capture, to pass electricity through air and capture nitrogen and sell it to people. And it's subsidized by the federal government so that everybody can get these fertilizers. So we start having intensive crop cultivation. And people like my dad saying, yeah, I guess I can make a nice lawn because that's what people say to do. And in the backyard, let's say Wayside Gardens here selling the shrubs. They're 1920s, but this is their 1941 catalog, again with Calycanthus and Calicarpa, our native plants that are new, Coosa dogwoods. But in the backyard, just shrubs and some grass, which is great. A great big place I can dig up and make into a vegetable garden, and nobody will make me mow it. So lots of vegetable gardens are being developed. So we get into 1950, and now gardens, because we got to do something with that vegetable garden area after it's not a vegetable garden anymore, gardens become status. Flowers really move in the 50s. There's insulation in the walls of the houses now, the new houses anyway, but still people are planting things close to the walls. So
that's the original reason we have the foundation plantings today is we didn't mention it earlier, is for heat retention. Right. It would insulate houses.
And at first there were only spireas and mock oranges and forsythias. We didn't have evergreens. When the evergreens came in.
And then they became extremely popular.
Here's where you're going to see them. So we're still hanging on to this foundation. So my parents moved into this house. They had 7 of us and 3 cousins and needed a big house. And so an uncle helped them buy a house that, whoa, look at this. It's got trellises. It's got
separate porches.
Yeah, all over the place. It's got a pond and a fountain in the front yard, for crying out loud. It's got a seat, a trellis seat where you can, we fed the birds on top of it, birds and squirrels. But this was cool. This was status. This was show off, ladies, you know. But look at that lawn behind my sister. It didn't stand up very well to that many kids, that much traveling. We're still not doing very well with the lawns. But gardens weren't in the front yard. It was still lawns and trees in the front yard, except my front yard. I'm the tall one there. The only time in
The
my
only
life it
time
was.
you've been the tall one.
On either side of the walkway is Sedum Autumn Joy. And we would sit and play with Sedum Autumn Joy. The kids in the neighborhood, the boys especially, would teach us how to rub the leaves membrane and make farting noises by blowing in the leaves. So I want to know, because Sedum Autumn Joy is one of my comfort plants. If you're familiar with the term comfort food, that's stuff that you eat because you had it when you were little. It was Lipton's chicken noodle soup and bologna sandwiches as your comfort food or whatever it was. Do you have a comfort plant or a comfort garden feature? Something that you need to tell your family and friends, I have to have this in the garden. Don't mess with this. If you do,
only one.
Type it in. Only one. Yep. Go for it. Lilac, a fountain. See, and a lot of this stuff harked back to that time when it was flashy to have bulbs and hydrangeas. Oh my gosh, the hydrangeas that came in the 50s. Sweet alyssum for the smell and for the fact that it would come back and the fact that your grandmother or aunt planted it in memory of your father. Wind chimes. Oh yes, yes. Wind chimes and gazing globes in the 50s.
For me right now, it's got to be a bird feeder, I think.
Yeah.
As much as I love plants.
And blue flowers and violets. Yes. So there are comfort foods, and they might hark back to this time when gardens became chic. In the 1960s, we had a huge backlash against organophosphates. This was the time of Rachel Carson and Silent Spring, and Rodale Institute developing ways for people to do things without. But they probably wouldn't have been heard except that agriculture failed. We've been pouring so many organophosphates onto the crops in such huge numbers, irrespective of need, that the insects had quickly become resistant. And now farms were failing because no matter how much money they spent on pesticides, they still couldn't bring in enough crop to pay for the cost. So this ecology movement started partly as that. So did making island beds.
Yep. And evergreens.
And evergreens, because now we've got people who've been growing for long enough to select some of these dwarf things. Dwarf,
well.
And show in this 1960 Bradshaw book, it was a series of books that were quite popular. Look at that backyard. Look at the number of evergreens in that backyard.
I mean, simply.
Look in the front yard at the junipers, three junipers and yews all packed together.
One juniper would swallow that.
And in the same
that type of juniper.
In the same book is a picture that says overplanting is a major fault. And I laughed. Your cover and your other pictures all show overplanting, but you're going to tell us don't overplant. At any rate, evergreens in the 60s. And because we were still hooked on planting things in the foundation, people jammed them into the foundation. There they are, that house that was set back in 1900 in Massachusetts and had nothing in front of it, now has 3 shrubs, which you must trim all the time.
Into meatloafs. Instead of letting them be wispy and nice, put one there, and let it spread out. It would look fantastic.
But lots of groundbreaking and controversial information out of places like the Rodale Institute for Organic Gardening. And we had people, this is one of my favorite books of all time. Steve likes the lawn book. I like All About Weeds. Edwin Rollins Spencer was a extension agent in West Virginia. When he retired from being a professor and an extension agent, he retired to the family farm and was running the farm and thought, I'm looking around and people are looking for this information. I need to capture the information about how we did things practically on the farm before all of this brouhaha over pesticides and whatever. So if you read All About Weeds, which has a chapter on each of the weeds you might want to look at, or which ones you don't want to look at, like the Johnson grass we're now dealing with. So this is wild onion. I know a lot of people who have wild onion are also called wild garlic or ramps.
We've got it.
I love it. The very best way is to turn in the hogs without rings in their noses, or plow and
let them at it.
I never knew why they put rings in the noses of hogs until you realize, I've watched hogs do this. They root and dig and they eat bulbs. So if you take the rings out so that it doesn't hurt them to root around, they will clear out the wild garlic for you. This is that kind of capture of information that started in the 60s and continued further on. It took about 10 years before the Botanic Gardens caught on, but Brooklyn Botanic Gardens started, for instance, in 75, had a natural gardening handbook, which talked about how to use organic fertilizers, how to use sewage sludge like millorganite for Trell. And people were making money. They were seeing people really getting into this gardening stuff and how much money was available. So we now have the garden, the flower
How
of the
about
month.
a flower of the month? Yes. Have you ever been in the book a month club? Yeah.
Why not that? And another big development, Grandma Frances, not actually my grandma, just a friend of the family who was grandma aged. And
she was grandma to the neighborhood.
Taught me a lot of stuff.
Mr. Brown.
I still, in my mind's eye as a kid, I see the hem of her house dress. She retired to Florida, not to live with her kids, not to die early, but she retired to Florida and at a place where she could grow her zinnias still. For the first time in U.S. and Midwest history, other than being on the East Coast, we started having people continue to garden into old age, their own garden. We had long-term gardening. We had long-term heritage. So that takes us to the 70s and 80s, where in the 70s, people stopped moving quite so much as they had before.
Slowed down a little.
From end of World War II to about 1970, people were really hustling all over the country, following good jobs, following the new subdivisions being built. But now they started staying in place for more than just 5 to 7 years. Weather reports were more reliable. People could grow better.
IPM came in where people started to use that integrated pest management methods.
Right. They didn't just put on a pesticide because it was this week and time to do it. They started actually learning about it. Last year was this week. This year it's 2 weeks earlier. Different, yeah. And there were native plant societies that were saying, you know what, we ought to do something with our serviceberry. How come we're only eating cherries and we can't? Why can't people be eating serviceberries? So this is only 50 years ago, and moving right in that same vein into the 80s, they rediscovered oils. They'd been set aside when organophosphates came out. They stopped looking at how to use oils, which had been hard to use in the 20s because they were thick, heavy, they burned plants. Mm-hmm. Now they've got refining.
Technology is better. Everything, the spray bottles simply are better.
Everything's better, and they can start using oils without using.
Biological control companies started showing up with growing mantises, growing
and
insects.
Raising BT and ladybugs and beneficial nematodes. These things all became something that you could make some money doing. At the same time that Grandma Frances and others of her kind were retiring into little places of their own and still gardening. The first time in American history, and this includes the East Coast, there had
been cyclical up and downs every 10 years.
Every 10 years. 10 years interest in horticulture, 10 years it would fall off. So reliable that people who were in the business would have their kids grow peonies and irises and daylilies for about 10 years, and then they'd pull them out of the business back into the farm because it's the way that it happened. But in 1980, it was supposed to peak and fall off, and it didn't. It just started climbing continually until you got into the 90s. And now here's all these people who've been gardening, who've got parents and grandparents who've been gardening for 2 generations for the first time. Gardens are going to move out into the front yards.
We're starting to show up with ponds, water features, light,
outside
night lighting.
Yep, your average person can go out and buy lighting now. And we start getting into all the genetic engineering controversies that make more people grow a little bit more of their own food. And you get people wanting to keep on gardening, so they want better tools. You get people like us who said, we'll take out the whole lawn. And we went too far.
It was too far. We both admit it.
Not everybody can take care of something that looks like that, because the plants that you put out there, some of them get a little carried away, native or not.
Yes.
That goldenrod is
and watch out for that milkweed later.
Yep.
This guy right in the front.
Right there. But there are ways, and we're still working on it, aren't we? How to have shorter, more controllable non-lawns as we got into the 90s. And then we get into 2000, people are sitting out in the front porches now, people are walking more. The extension has dumped its information onto the internet as of about 98, 99. So there's lots of information for people. They're starting to patent plants because we can make more money out of doing them.
Money changed.
And we're starting to have huge problems with invasive species, so much so that we legislate against the sale of some things. But at the same time, Smithsonian Magazine comes back with articles on
grass,
New York
lawn.
Central Park's Great Lawn, and Maria Hernandez here, who was the gardener in charge there, and the sod father for taking care of our turf. So what goes around comes around. The cycle is pushing again on lawn. So we'll start a poll. I'll let you get the poll up, Steve. How many generations experience can you draw on? This is a selfish question on our part. Polling.
Right here.
Got it already. It's up.
Oh,
okay. I wondered why
you.
it showed up even though you weren't on the line. So how many generations experience can you draw from? And how many generations have you influenced? And this is a selfish question. If you've been looking at your timeline, you might look like Steve and I, that we can go back 3 or 4 generations and actually pull some information from people. One generation, quite a number of people have influenced 2 generations already. See, there's that 2-generational gardening coming up. Okay, for those of you who are looking at that, if you want to decide on an answer and submit, we're going to go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and end that poll and share the results. So drawing from 2 generations, influencing 2 generations, huh? This is where we're at. I kind of thought we'd have a few more. Ooh, there's some people that we need to talk to. Let's have some conversations here. Those people have found ways to keep on influencing beyond your own time. Maybe with trees, maybe with societies, maybe with trusts. That's great. Thank you. Go ahead and
wait, what is?
We can end poll.
I got it. Should be.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. So most of us are looking at a history of 2 generations, and we're aspiring to and have worked our way into 2 generations. Do you have any questions about any of this? Because we'll look at we'll reflect on what this means to us in chapter 3.
We do have just a couple questions. There was a follow-on we couldn't quite get to from the last Q&A. Stacy was curious if hawthorns were used for the same purpose as the Osage orange.
Oh yes, indeed. The hawthorns have a long history in Europe, and they were favored here. Our native hawthorns, the Cruscali, what does that mean? Cockspur hawthorns were particularly well prized because they have iron-like thorns on them. But they also brought their Washington and English hawthorns over with them and planted them as hedges. Yeah, mixed hedges, including with roses in them. Whatever they could get.
Yep, that's what Gretchen's just said in the chat, the multiflora rose. Yep. Sandy is curious about, when did home garden hoses appear? Do you know?
When the rubber hoses showed up, that's when lawn irrigation started. It was the late 1880s, 1890s, where rubber hoses were invented, and then irrigation was available for lawns. The first lawn sprinkler was around that time, 1900 or so, I think.
But the vast majority of people were still bucketing water around until plastics came in the 60s.
And that was the big problem with early lawns, is no irrigation, no way to get water out to them.
Yeah, good question.
Stacy is curious about how long chemical fertilizers remain in the ground.
Different chemicals and different soils, different answers.
Yep.
For instance, Rodale Institute did a study of chemicals remaining in compost. And so after 60 to 90 days of composting, residuals of chemicals. And the chemicals that they were looking for, particularly carbaryl, which is 7, and what was the other one? They didn't find significant residuals after 60 to 90 days of composting. But in some soils, particularly soils that have got a lot of humus in them, different chemicals will bind to the complex molecule that a humus is and stay for quite a long time. In drier soils that don't get leached out, they can stay for longer. And some of them, starts with C. Steve, it did in the fireflies, and we've talked about it so many times.
Man.
There was one that was banned in the early 70s during the ecology movement, where people said, wait a minute, this is not good. It was used extensively throughout the United States around the foundations of new houses as a termite deterrent. And that has a 20-year residual in the soil.
At least.
Speaking to one of the entomologists from Rose Exterminating Company about what they would see, when they tear down buildings that were built before 70, and they take out the visqueen layer that's often put down underneath, you can still smell the stuff that's there. So some of it a long time, some of it less time. And what happened with integrated pest management is the philosophy of use the least lasting, most tightly targeted things that you can, not broad, long-lasting cannons.
Yep.
And it is what we help people figure out how to do. How can I use something that's going to have as little, as tight a target, hit it as tight a target as I can do, and stick around for as least time.
Yeah.
Lately, we've seen more of the shotgun spraying again, though, where they just spray for everything.
We just keep having to relearn things.
Michelle is noting that in the 50s they were still putting clover into seed mixes that would help fix the nitrogen.
Oh yeah.
So you didn't have to watch so you didn't step on bees though.
And actually, you can still you can just buy the Dutch white clover now. We are putting it into our lawn, Steve and I, because it's green and it's a legume and it helps improve the soil, and so we'll
brings in bees.
We'll seed it in ourselves. Yep.
Yeah.
And then Michelle is asking whether, do you think Sacra's compost is safe for a veggie garden?
Sacra is the Southeast Oakland County Compost and Recycling Authority, for those that aren't in this area, SOCCRA. And they collect the yard waste from participating communities, compost it on a couple of big sites, and bring it back. They make a good product. They do test the product. They test it for salt residue. They test it for certain pesticide and heavy metal residue, and they've said that it's safe. I trust them, because you can't not trust everybody.
Yes. Yes.
I've been out and talked.
We've used their product. It's a good product. We don't do much vegetable gardening, Janet and I, so we can't.
And we
haven't used it firsthand in a vegetable garden.
And when we do vegetable garden, we like to use everything that's just right on site. But we've been out to and toured with the managers of the composting site that Waste Management runs west of Michigan. And we've talked to the compost managers at botanical gardens, and they are very proud of what they do, of what they know, of how scientific they are about it. So I think we're probably got as good a product as we're possibly going to get. And how can you figure that it's not at least as safe as the stuff in your yard? The house that we're living in now, we have no idea of the history of what stuff was put here, but we do know that lawns have promoted lawn management tomes, and pushes have been to put pesticides on the lawn, and that
for
they have
years,
residuals.
Years and years.
We know that when we moved in, there were no spiders anywhere in the house. It took 3 years before spiders started showing up.
And then a guy came and tried to sell me control for the spiders. I almost, if I had a gun, I might have.
Yeah, so is it safer than what's in your yard? We don't even know what's in our yard. Yeah. So I'd say use the compost, because it's better to use it.
It may be safer than any chemical, a bag that you get that's not, you bring a bag in that's topsoil or sterilized. Is it sterilized too? What's in it?
Barb is asking about PFAS. I might be jumping out of your order, Sonia.
No, that's in line.
PFAS is a new category of chemicals that we're realizing is a problem in fire retardants and in coatings that are put on fabrics, and you name it. I've spoken to our health department about PFAS because we're on a well, and our river valley has problems with PFAS in at least some places. Testing has only just become available in Michigan. Prior to this year, tests had to be sent to California to test to see if PFAS was in the water, to know whether or not there was a problem with it. So we're only just beginning to figure out what's up with PFAS, let alone how long it stays in the soil or what's going on.
What it's doing.
We're living with the legacy of a lot of years of good living through chemistry that was too enthusiastically embraced.
And quickly approved.
Yeah.
And now the rules have been cut back even more sometimes
Yeah.
for approval. So
Yeah.
we'll see.
Anything else?
Yeah, we do have one more heritage kind of question. Joanne said that she was told that heritage peonies of previous generations have fragrance, but today's new peonies don't. Is that true?
To a certain extent, yes. For quite a while, really World War I on into the 40s and even the 50s, people wanted big flowers and colors that they hadn't had before. So dahlias, peonies, roses were all
The
being bred
irises
for
and-
the look, and cameras had something to do with that too.
Yeah.
And without regard for fragrance. So it didn't matter that there wasn't fragrance. But starting in the 70s and 80s, breeders started looking for fragrance again. And those original plants, fortunately, are still around of the roses. The peonies are hard. There used to be peony collections in most botanical gardens, and we're down to like 3 in the country. Some of those with virus infections
Yes.
so they may not be able to recapture all of the fragrance in the roses, but certainly some of the ones that are hybridized are crosses with the tree peonies, like Barzella that Sonia grows and that we have back from her, has a lemony, spicy fragrance to it.
And there's, we have 3 peonies out front. I can't remember, but one of them was very fragrant.
So we'll see more of it now that people have started demanding. We have a lot of influence. We are the buyers who say, here's what I want. And we can get into that now.
Yep, and that's what we've got, so let's move on.
Yeah, let's move on. We're going to move on very quickly because this is where I said we're all for chapter 2 and of Thanks Great Grand Folks. We're glad that you could be with us, and we hope that you'll stay around for chapter 3.